Greetings and welcome to an informal conversation with Colttaine. Many of you might not know Colttaine. He has a MGTOW channel, and in my opinion, it's probably the best in terms of its content of all the newly arisen MGTOW channels. It's highly analytic, well thought out, and the videos are very well produced. Obviously, someone who knows what he's doing. Now, Colttaine is unique because he's a denizen of the penal colony, and although there actually aren't that many denizens of the penal colony in the world, if you come to think of it. So, we're going to have some interesting conversations, and he's going to tell us a little bit to begin with about how he became aware of the MGTOW thing, and perhaps after that, a little bit more about the unique circumstances of gynocracy in the context of the penal colony as opposed to other places. So thanks for having this conversation with me, Colttaine. And so why don't you just tell us how you got involved in the whole MGTOW thing or became aware of it, please?
Well, I guess I was probably MGTOW a long time before I actually found the movement. Uh, I suppose, like a lot of people, I just kind of stumbled on it through, 6 degrees of separation of various people's channels. Um, I'd say if there was any one person who was responsible for me ending up here now, it would be Rebecca Watson. I think it's a perfect example of was it Princess Leia when she said to Vader in Star Wars that the tighter you grip on the galaxy, the more star systems slip through your fingers. Um, Soon as that whole elevator gate thing happened, I used to be somewhat involved with the online atheist community, and yeah, as soon as that whole elevator gate thing kind of blew up and that whole community started imploding, I was one of the people that was like, "Hey, hang on, this isn't sensible. This isn't rational." I'd started, following more people who were critical of that sort of nonsense, like the Amazing Atheist and Thunderfoot. From there, I found Gurewitz Watts channel, and then eventually yours and Barbarossa's. But it's one of those things where I got a lot out of those videos and learned a lot. But yeah, I probably was MGTOW probably 4 years before I actually found the community.
Okay, so but prior to the community, what were the motivations for you to effectively go your own way prior to discovering the video content?
Uh, there's a lot. I mean, I've not had particularly good experience in the dating world. Nothing violent or anything like that, but just lots of being taken advantage of, and there seems to be uh, how do I put this? Um, I'm a guy that kind of rationally analyzes everything, and when you kind of look at the world of dating, there's some conclusions that you come to, which, cynical as they may be, I think they're somewhat undeniable. I mean, if you look at the way, I mean, one of my first sort of experiences with purple pill sort of knowledge, I guess, was when I read The Game by Neil Strauss. Um, there's a lot of good information from the PUA community, but once you actually once you actually read that stuff and understand what it's saying, I don't see how anyone with any self-respect can really take that information and continue to play the game. Um, one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is that when you actually look at the human courtship ritual, men and women, like women, for example, they have hair dye, they have makeup, slimming dresses, high heels, which make feet look smaller and define the calf muscles more. Then you've got the guys who have you know varying degrees of um, uh, pre-thought out pickup lines and depending on how far you take it with game neuro linguistic programming and things like that. I kind of I look at that and I sort of think, what are the like how would you define the human courtship ritual? And I kind of think if you looked at scorpions, I mean scorpions dance, bowerbirds, I guess, they display, they create displays of artistic expression to colourful nests to attract a mate. The human, if you were to define the human courtship ritual, it would be based on deceit, basically. And I don't really want to,
Well,
yeah,
I don't
I
mean
don't,
to contradict you, but there are several. There is a goodly number of species that engage us in the sea as well. I don't remember the exact species, but there are several species of insects, for
mm,
example, that it's actually the male in essence that practices deceit in these cases. But what
yeah,
the male insect will do will much as a male human is supposed to provide resources to a female, the male insect he'll have a bit of food,
mm,
and that will lure the female in, providing resources effectively, and
yeah,
and it's amazing how evolution works. It's just enough food so the act of copulation can take place, which is only 15 to 20 minutes. And
yeah,
oftentimes he'll just fly away with the food and not give the female anything, which is, I guess, the
yeah,
equivalency of sort of casual sex. It's using all the game and stuff to deceive the female into sort of trusting you and
mm,
offering up well, for some highly
yeah,
coveted box. But there are several, certainly in the insect world, species that do that, and um, then you have the rather insane species, certain praying mantises and arachnids, where the female almost invariably consumes the male, but it's just so
yeah,
important to get your DNA out there, so it doesn't really matter to the male ultimately.
mm,
So
yeah.
I think
Well, I guess, I mean, I mean, I mean, that's true, but I suppose it's one of those things where if you're planning to live a life more than just insect stimulus response, mate, spawn and die type life, yeah, once you're aware of how that, the dating world actually works, it's
Well, absolutely.
presents somewhat of a
I'm in
moral
complete
quandary.
agree with you. I'm in complete agreement with you. My, recent video, I talked about this often, but escape velocity. By the way, this is how I came to know Colttaine. Whom I just want to say you should really. I'll post a link as well. He has an excellent channel, and he'll be producing more. He's very intelligent and he has some very interesting thoughts. And I thoroughly enjoy talking with him in general. That's why I'm bringing you this opportunity before this track, though. But yeah, I mean, this is effectively what I was talking about. That once you dissect the game, yeah, sure, we have higher cognitive faculties and all this other good stuff, but effectively, what we're doing is, playing, I don't know, the mating game of a gadfly or praying mantis. It's just there are different variables or different uh, strategies, approaches, but ultimately,
Mm,
uh, because we have higher cognitive functions, it's easier to pierce the veil and think, this just really isn't. This is just silly.
yeah, it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't, though. I mean, even the PUA guys, like they are one of the main groups. In fact, apart from MGTOW, I think MGTOW almost has more in common with PUA than it does with your standard MRAs, because MGTOW seems to be really, I mean, not so much interested in changing. I mean, you can be both. They're not mutually exclusive, but yeah, MGTOW seems to be more about finding out how the world works, and it's like a survivalist type uh, philosophy rather than an activist type philosophy. I think yeah, in that regard, PUA is probably the closest brethren, I
Agreed. And
guess,
and
in
I
in
actually made
the
a video a while back. I don't know if you ever watched it, and don't ask me for
mm,
the name. I don't remember. It was quite some time ago, where I said that PUAs and MGTOW, in some regards, are very similar. It's just the
yeah,
consequences that one draws as a PUA, as opposed to
yeah,
being part of
yeah,
MGTOW, seem to be quite different. What
yeah,
what baffles me is um, the well. they don't like to hear it, but what I would describe as sort of enshrinement of the female box as some sort of a goal in itself. It's almost like something to do. It's
Yeah,
like when I'm playing the FPS game and I'm just trying to improve my sniping skills. I mean, it's a poor analogy, but I enjoy doing it. Maybe that's what they do. They just enjoy doing it. But the way it's put up, the way the box is put up on a pedestal,
yeah,
it's not really normal. It's not. I mean, if I get a play an FPS game and get a lot of headshots consistently, I'm pleased with myself. But I never for once think, wow, this is the goal, and everything should be subordinate to it. Um,
yeah,
it's weird. And I actually a while back I don't know if I don't think I tend not to block people. It's occasionally has happened because they said things such as endorsing murder and stuff, and it's probably not a good
yeah,
idea. But I had one guy who claimed to be a medical student and claimed that I don't know PUA was some sort of higher calling, blah blah. I just baffled me.
yeah.
And
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose it's one of those things. I mean, it's slightly different. I mean, I guess in the fact that, like, I guess in a way you could say the first person shooter is it's a form of entertainment, whereas uh, the whole mate spawn and die thing is the whole reason for biology. I mean, that's
mm,
the meaning of life, biologically speaking. But yeah, it's just one of those things where if you sort of start looking at things beyond that scope, and I don't mean they're smart guys. I don't
some of
see
some
how
of
they
some of
they
not all of them. Some of them are. Yeah.
well, not all of them. I tend to think the guys actually doing the theory crafting and the analysis probably are, and I don't see how they can come to those conclusions and still want to play the praying mantis game.
Mm. Yeah, I don't. Well, I'm in particular because particularly smart PUAs understand just how facile most females are in their
Mm.
mentality and how easy they are to manipulate with certain cues and things like that. It's I mean, I'll say it. This disgusts me, not in a physical sense. I'm not repulsed by it, but I just on a mental emotional level. I
Mm.
in general that kind of facile mindset that just allows and women time and again display this sort of behavior. I mean, I think women in general tend to be a lot less self-aware on a deeper level. Chomsky might
Yeah.
realistically refer to this as deep structure versus surface structure. Surface structure, they're really great, I guess, but on the deep structure level, they're kind of. And once, at least for myself, once I grasp that thoroughly, and I just the desire to engage with that sort of thing or sort of creature uh,
Yeah.
uh, ceased
Yeah.
for the most part.
I mean, frankly, I'd rather be playing the first-person shooter myself, but
Yeah, yeah, I would. It's more fun. It's less costly usually, and we've talked about this often in private conversations. But I mean, let's be honest. When have you ever had a truly interesting conversation with a female?
yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that did sort of change when
Your silence on the matter is deafening, but that's. I mean, sometimes no answer is an answer. That's my point. Exactly. Yeah.
sorry, can you is my
No,
microphone
no,
not
no, no.
coming through?
I was,
Oh,
I was making a sort of Roman reference there. Yeah, I asked, how many times have
sorry.
you had an interesting conversation with a female, and you
Yeah,
didn't actually answer the question and said you. But I'll say that I can think of maybe point zero, a semi-interesting conversation I've had, maybe about a very specific subject. But
mm,
apart from that, I've never really ever had an interesting conversation with a woman. Now, the retort to this might be, well, you've just not, you haven't met all women, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I had a pretty heavy academic background. I have a lot of secondary education. You'd think in that context, I don't want to take up, I mean, this is your time effectively, Colttaine, but I do want to mention this. I've talked about this in private at Barroso, but the distinctive feature I think between female academics, generally speaking, and male academics, in my impression has been after several years in the institution, is that there are female academics who are very capable, but I seem to recall this one female, girl from Hong Kong, who we both did a master's degree at the time, years back in linguistics. She went on to pursue a PhD. I decided not to do that. And she's about to finish up her PhD either in psycholinguistics or applied linguistics. And you would think this is a person who would be, possessed of a rigorous mind, and I guess with regards to linguistics, she is. But if you were to look at her Facebook, you would think she's just another floozy. I mean, all she does is
Mm.
post pictures of, mirror shots where she's pouting with lipstick on, or fancy dinners, or travel, or my famously, it was my ex-wife liked to post on her Facebook. Her interests included uh, food and travel. I mean, these are interests
Yeah.
apparently.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that I've found I mean, it's one of the things that has kind of been a bit of an eye opener for me since I have found the MGTOW community, and it encourages you, because I mean, at the time, like I was done with dating, relationships, all of that crap. Um, but it really does push you to examine more than just that, this community. And one of the things I've noticed is that when I think back on it, you talk to girls, and you're like, what are you interested in? And they're like, oh, like music, like movies. And I'm like, well, who doesn't like music and movies? I mean, can you be more specific? Do you actually play an instrument? Do you are you specifically interested in science fiction? Is there, do you want to make your own movies? And yeah, it's, as soon as you start kind of asking those kind of questions, you start getting dead-eyed stares.
well, and what
It's
I recall about this particular girl, who was very bright, she was actually quite good at mathematics as well, is that any question that wasn't specifically related to the content we were studying or some examination we had to take. I mean, if you want to sort of talk about the implications of, say, linguistic theory on human communication in a more abstract sense that had nothing to do with the classroom per se, but just a sort of,
yeah.
rather, for lack of a better description, intellectual conversation, she either just
Mm.
had no interest or was dumbfounded. Or so. My observation is that even female academics seem to be very sort of tunnel vision in what they do, and it, it's not based on a fascination with how the world works.
No.
And
I, I think with most like women I've met in academics, or at least in academics, where you would consider it a fairly hard subject. The thing that I've noticed is it's all about status. They're not a lot of the time they're not doing it to as you say, discover, you know, answer questions about the world. It's more about, oh, men have all of these positions. I'm going to do it so that I have the same. It's not about it's not about producing interesting research work. It's about having those three letters, PhD, in front of your name.
yeah, I mean, you did mention an acquaintance of yours who had finished her engineering and degree, or master's, I think it was, and she just
No, just a standard degree.
okay, but right, an engineer, was it mechanical engineering, was it? Um,
Yeah.
a fairly difficult subject, and the only reason she did it, based on what you've told me, is that yeah, 'cause to get a good job, which she ended up doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, which and I didn't really, I wouldn't have said that we spoke about it extensively. I mean, for all I know, there's things going on in her head I don't know, but I found it particularly interesting that I mean, me and a lot of my friends are real petrol heads. I'm into motorcycles. Most of my friends are into cars. And I mean, those sorts of mechanical things, she didn't seem to have an interest in mechanical engineering beyond I'm studying it, I'm getting a job. Um,
Well, I think women, in the sense, are more pragmatic, but
mm,
you touch on something, you say, well, maybe there was something more going on in her head, but this is the myth of the allure of women in general. I think if you haven't deconstructed the mating game, then men are often in
yeah,
awe. There's something mysterious about them, but the actual content. in their heads. When I think of my most recent ex-wife, this was a person who didn't read books apart from the ones assigned to her.
Yeah.
Most people I know, women or men, hanging out in a large bookstore, say in New York City, as I used to do when I lived there, would be perusing something. Maybe it would be something totally inane if it were in the case of females, but nonetheless, instead of getting a comment such as "I'm bored," yes, find something to do. Um,
Yeah.
I think this should be can't really be overstated. Generally speaking, in all of my experiences, um, even women who seemingly, and think of another example, the ex-wife of a friend of mine. By the way, I refer to ex-girlfriends as ex-wives, so don't let that confuse the viewers. Everyone's an ex-wife in my world. I call marriage game over as opposed to proper marriage, as opposed to just marriage, which is just a relationship. But anyway, he had an ex-wife who was very into psychology and statistics, but she was also a feminist, and so she had this whole agenda, and she would twist things, and like even back then when I was more of a kind of blue virgin on purple pillar, I just thought, this is just weird. So, and this is something I want to talk about. I don't want to talk too much about it because I'm planning on making a video on it. But women in general are much less interested in objective truth than men are.
Yeah.
Care more about feelings and how things make them feel. And men, generally
Mm.
speaking, care more about, well, what's true and how things actually work. And the
Yeah.
consequences of how that makes you feel, well, that's kind of, whatever. But yeah, continuing, I mean, you can offer a unique perspective of a penal colony perspective. I mean,
Mm.
you mentioned before that feminism or the gynocracy or even just legislation and the legal parameters of the penal colony seem more draconian than even places like Canada, the United States. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Honestly, I think it's probably much the same as every other Western country, but I mean, every Western country seems to have its own little um, quirks. Um, we do have some particularly draconian common law marriage, common yeah. We call them de facto marriages here. Um, Last I heard, it was, I think if it could be proved you were in a relationship for um, 24 months, didn't have to be necessarily living together, didn't necessarily have to be a consecutive block. As far as the government is concerned, you're married. I actually had one friend in university who was living in a share house, and he and one of the other girls living there were both on student loans, which is handled by our Department of Human Services, or it's called Centrelink. Pretty much everyone in Australia would refer to it as Centrelink. So they were on student study loans, and because they'd been living together in this share house for 24 months, they one day their their they got a letter from Centrelink basically saying in bureaucratic terms, congratulations, you're now married, and they had to actually prove, they had to get a letter from the landlord to prove that they weren't in a relationship and that they were just rooming together.
That does sound pretty bad. But you also mentioned that uh, men of the penal colony are particularly terrified of the women in the penal colony.
Yeah, it's very strange. There's still a Australia still has a lot of traditional conservative um, a lot of conservative traditions still alive and well here. Anzac Day, that sort of thing. It's still very much a glorification of World War One and the the young boys who were, in my opinion, sold out by their government. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of weird things. I think I mentioned to you. I don't know if these are strictly Australian uh, behaviours, but I think I mentioned to you the other day that, I mean, in Australia, if a guy gets sick, um, pretty much every woman in his life, female co-workers, female family members, friends, significant other, will basically deride him for having the man flu,
Right.
um, which I find it particularly. I mean, I've heard women talk about, how who've actually, they mention that they can't understand why guys don't go to the doctor when they get sick, and then, 2 months later you get sick and they're right there along with everyone else, oh, diddums, you've got the man flu, do you? Just harden up. Yeah, it's,
Well, I mean, this is kind of reflective of they're not even double standards. It's just a sort of a cognitive dissonance in the minds of most human beings, specifically though in the minds of females, to say one thing and do something completely different. Um,
yeah,
I mean, I think women know, I mean, maybe on a subconscious level, that with regards to medical care and what have you, that if men actually did take care of themselves, that would take resources away from women. And we talked about this as well, that rates of breast cancer and prostate cancer are roughly equal, but depending on what country it is, the numbers are just astronomically higher in terms of investment for breast cancer than they are prostate cancer.
yeah,
And, you know, I think if men were to en masse, never happen, get up and say, no, we want equal funding too, there would be a conflict of interest. And the women would draw upon the power of the board consensus to unite. And I mean, yeah, so I think they know, at least on a subconscious level, that resources that are not directed towards them could be potentially directed anywhere else, including men. And so they want to keep them there where they are.
yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's even they're even consciously aware of it. I mean, it's something that guys tend to engage in as well. I mean, I don't know if
no,
you have it.
I mean, speaking, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, I mean, we've talked about this as well. The biggest problem humanity faces is not just, this is not singling out women or men, is the automaticity of thought and action, or the autopilot function, as I like to call it, that
Yeah,
people are just, people are effectively these insects engaging in mating rituals, doing all these things without thinking twice about them, buying products for evolutionarily grounded reasons or explainable reasons that they're not aware of, and so on and so forth. I mean, let's face it, most human beings are sleepwalking through reality. Personally, I
yeah,
think this is the greatest danger to humanity out there. It's
yeah,
it's it's what I talked about in escape velocity, the combination of higher cognitive thought and functions not being put to good use, instead relying on the antediluvian prehistoric senses to guide you without really questioning them, and what you
mm,
end up with is a almost like a portrait of of prehistoric thought and action put into a modern scene.
yeah,
High end cars, lipstick, products, things that wouldn't have clearly did not exist many thousands or millions, certainly millions of years ago for the earlier hominids. But it's just all being fueled and directed towards that as well. And you know, look at the cosmetics industry. It's one of the industries I wouldn't say despise, but it's such a colossal waste of human energy and resources.
mm,
And why is it there? Well, the whole mating game thing. I mean,
yeah.
it's
Deceit.
well, I mean, I mean, the thing, the irony is the people who are peddling cosmetic products. I mean, I've actually read, I forgot where, so don't quote me on it. I think some of them are mentioned they had read up on evolutionary psychology. They know where to hit, say, women where it hurts, and women are
Oh,
incredibly credulous and gullible usually.
absolutely. I
And
think that one of the best advertising campaigns I've ever seen, and I love how gullible people are that they bought into it, was that Dove um, that Dove commercial about True Beauty, where they actually show you the photo shoot where she starts off as a normal woman, and then they apply the makeup and they light the scene and they photograph it, and you see the Photoshop work, and then you see the final like glossy photo cover,
uh,
and it's about how, oh, don't be deceived by all the makeup and Photoshop trickery. These glossy magazine women are real women too, and it was by Dove. It's at the end of the day, they're the ones trying to sell you the beauty products that they're claiming are creating body image problems. But it was an incredibly people completely overlooked the hypocrisy of it. I mean, it was an incredibly successful advertising campaign.
well, I think in general, women do seem to be more responsive. I mean, you have experience in advertising, so
Yeah.
I don't know how you could comment on this, but in my observations, uh, women seem much more responsive to commercial. I think I told you this a while back. I mean, when I want something, it'll pop into my head. I need a new pair of shoes. Let me look for it. I need a new rucksack, so I'll probably be the next couple of weeks
Mm.
looking for. I mean, it's not because I've seen it. Whereas women, uh, women, first off, you have the board consensus. If you have a high profile female endorsing a product, women sort
Mm.
of naturally respond to that, I think. They
Yeah.
tend to just be drawn into that, and this is, and thus was born the cosmetics industry, or thus it continues, um,
Yeah.
and it's and this is a people. I mentioned this in the video as well. People don't want to acknowledge this, but when women have freedom in a society, this is what they're going to do. That's free market capitalism as well. There's a product and people want it, and so they mass produce it. And
Yeah.
be it clothing, lipstick, cosmetics. I mean, just a colossal waste of energy
Mm.
and resources and minds as well. And the depravity of it all, and I'm not using this word lightly, is that uh, I know men. I mentioned this. I have a friend. He's he used to be a mathematician. Now he specializes in mid-Ottoman Empire history and translation of texts. And anyway, smart guy. And he used to defend some of the floozy interests of either my ex-wife or some other ex-wife of his,
Mm.
makeup or these food and travel, and I mean this. So no, she doesn't have any interest. Do you see? Or to the extent that she did. In the case of my ex-wife, she liked making kind of uh, fashionable pseudo art and furniture kind of thing, like
Yeah.
chairs made out of wires that you probably would collapse in on you if you sat on them. But anyway, I have no idea who buys this stuff. But and
Mm.
um and he said to me that is as equally as valid at the time he was doing different kinds of advanced geometry as the advanced kind of geometry he was doing at university, or so men, I think he actually believes it too.
Yeah.
This idea that all endeavors and all fields of knowledge and all the interests are somehow equivalent, when they're clearly
Yeah.
not. Cosmetics and creating pseudo art um, does nothing to forward humanity, whereas I don't. I'm not a mathematician, but I imagine there are probably some potential applications to studying advanced geometry.
Yeah.
So but it baffles me because men tolerate it. And I just want to stress this. I'm sure you'll agree is that Barbara Russ has talked about this, but it, the problem is that men countenance this. Men countenance PUAs countenance the floozy, silly stupidity and simplicity of
Yeah.
women. Um, and men, obviously, for evolutionary reasons, we wouldn't have the majority of women that we have now if men hadn't countenanced it from the get-go. If they hadn't said, "Well, that's okay. She has her waist hip ratio, and looks pretty and has full lips, and okay, let's go, let's procreate. I think this is a problem, and clearly it doesn't bother most men, even hyper intelligent men like my friend. So
Yeah. I think one of the things I've observed is, sometimes you get intelligent men who do actually recognize that these are problems. Like they're like, oh, women are really, badly behaved in and these areas. And then they do nothing to. It's like, I know guys that complain about the fact that they're expected to pay for dinner on a date. And then the next date they go on, they pay for dinner. They recognize the bad behavior, but they go right ahead and enforce it.
well, I think many men feel trapped. I mean, they're not even so much trapped as is, what is the alternative? I have a very intelligent friend in the United States who's extremely successful in his. He's involved in budget management in the state of Rhode Island. Very successful, very smart. Probably was the best economics student at my then university, way back ever, or at least to that date. And he was telling me in a conversation that I get it all, I get MGTOW, I get it all, but it's just I can't go that route. There's some obstacle. He still on some level pines away for I don't know some kind of female
Does he
companion
does
or
he does he pine away for companionship or sex? Because it's not really the same thing.
I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure to be honest. He never
Mm.
really defined that, but I suspect maybe a little bit of both. He always described the scenario as, just someone to hang out with and watch a movie and have some dinner and have a good fuck with.
You see, I don't know. I mean, I like to keep those things separate. I mean, getting back to what you were saying, you mentioned before about how, since going MGTOW, you kind of recognise that you've never really had good conversations with women. And I'd much prefer to just like, if I want to hang out, have beer, watch movies, eat dinner, talk about cars, computer games, whatever. That's what my bros are for. I just, I
Well, I
don't, I
mean,
don't
the
think,
problem is if you're not someone might call me a radical, you can't just come out and say, women as they stand now for the most part seem only good for sex and nothing else.
yeah,
That's extremely un-PC. I might be assaulted in public if I said that.
yeah.
Actually,
I, I,
sorry, go on.
I tend to phrase it that I don't have an interest in a relationship beyond sex. Um,
Well, that's more
that's
diplomatic.
how
But
it's more diplomatic, but yeah,
problem, Colttaine, is the following: is that it's not that acquiring sex is really that difficult, but it does require some effort. You need this kind of engagement, engaging people,
yeah,
and in the hours of conversation I might have with a female that might lead up to sex, those are hours I could, have with you talking about transhumanism or whatever. The point is
yeah,
it's not time well spent. And then we talked about what it was a post orgasm clarity. I mean,
yeah,
once you blow your load, you just don't even. I've never. I just want to get the hell out of there. Usually, I certainly don't want to
yeah,
talk to her.
mm,
And this was true even of my ex-wives for the most part. I mean, to the extent that I kind of feigned it because that's expected. I
yeah,
staying there and feigning interest,
mm,
but I think there are individual differences between men. In the case of my friend, it might be sex, it might be I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard to say in his case, but some guys just can't get to the next level and just say this just is not worth it. Um,
no,
and I and that's why you're always just going to have a minority of men as opposed to a majority or a large minority who are going their own way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something that I think we discussed not too long ago, but I mean that's one of the things that's worth keeping in mind with comparisons to the grass eaters and what's happening in Japan is
Yeah.
that I don't think a lot of those guys are necessarily going their own way out of choice. They're it's like dejected acceptance. It's not. There's no
Yeah,
philosophy. There's no.
why don't we introduce? I mean, I mean, there's clearly different categories of MGTOW.
Yeah.
I think you have this category which you describe, the sort of dejected and just kind of giving up thing.
Mm,
You have a large number of MGTOW are, I suspect, we talked to this with, I mentioned this in a video a while back, why go my own way. They would just, if some magic wand were waved, right, they just get back on the plantation. They're just waiting for
yeah.
things to be
The,
fixed. It's
the
the guys
marriage
going on,
strike.
yeah, they're on strike. And I think there's a smaller probably the smallest section, I think, do it for just, I guess, intellectual reasons and after analyzing everything. It's not my
Yeah.
impression, as much as the grass eaters coincidentally resemble MGTOW, it's not my impression that they have particularly rigorous intellectual reasons or grounds for what they're doing. It's just,
No.
it's life is too expensive, women are too expensive, it's all too complicated, blah 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 blah, and
Yeah.
okay, that's also a reason.
Yeah.
But
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's a reason, and I suspect, if things continue the way they are, I mean, we're probably going to see something similar in the West to what we see in Japan. But I mean, there's no Japanese Barbarossa. There's no Japanese Stardust.
there
They're not
might be, I don't know.
as
Let's
there,
not
there,
assume
there might be, but I highly doubt it. And I tend to think if things kind of get to that critical mass in the West too, I think most of the
look,
guys
I
that get involved with, yeah,
yeah, I completely agree with you. What you'll get in the West if it gets to critical mass are the dejected types and the men on strike types, which it's
mm,
fine if that's your reason. It's something I want to talk about in a video I'm working on, but at least briefly, ideally for me, what would like to see MGTOW evolve into is a very rigorous intellectual movement that's well
mm,
versed in science, particularly the science of evolutionary biology and psychology,
yeah,
and really because that would be effectively what makes it distinct from things like feminism, which is just kind of psychobabble. When you actually have facts and data and these things to back up what you're saying, and to me, I mentioned this most recent video. People people say, well, if you're aware of this and the women's suffrage led to bigger government and all this, why don't you want to take it away from them? Well, for one, I would have ethical concerns. I can't get on board with the Hobbesians.
yeah,
But also, it's just fascinating. I'm not saying feminism was a good thing, but it certainly revealed a great deal about men and women and how we
yeah,
interact. And uh, it 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 just took off. As if well, if we looked at the woman previously, kind of wrapped up in makeup, or maybe it was the woman prior to feminism, particularly second wave,
yeah,
was photoshopped, and kind of the Photoshop has been dropped, and I think it's endlessly fascinating. It's a lot of my time I devote to understanding different aspects of evolutionary psychology, and
mm,
that this is a great blessing. It's a way to enrich your mind. Ideally, that's what I would like to see in MGTOW, as opposed to merely just either going on strike because marriage is no longer a viable option, or let's face it, it's just too difficult and so you become dejected and depressed and you just decide to go your own way. I don't think these are they're reasons. They're good reasons in a sense. Certainly, you don't want to get married, so if you're going to have
mm,
to face legal penalties for that in the long run. But I envision MGTOW ultimately be a rigorous intellectual movement more than anything else. But
yeah,
that I don't think that's going to happen en masse. As you said, if this happens in the West, we will see the equivalent of grass eaters, I suppose. I don't think you'll see all the similarities for they tend to be interested
no,
in makeup and these sort of cosmetic things. But
mm,
I think Gerard's what said it way way back when she used to make good videos. Uh,
yeah,
said beer buddies and Xbox call. I mean, this is the guys who just kind of just don't give a shit. Just can't be bothered anymore. I think that's where it's going to evolve from. Um, Colttaine, are you still there?
yeah. Sorry,
That's
I
yeah.
drank a bit of water and
Oh, no
breathed
worries.
it in.
Um, but I think that's where it's going to emerge from that sector, and it'll definitely have superficial similarities to the grass eaters. Um, but once again, my concern long term, uh, and of course, people said this about atheists. You know, it's atheists getting together as atheists like herding cats. I think it's even more true of individually minded men. Most MGTOW are to do that. You know,
Mm,
but if the danger in the long run is if shit were ever fixed, if the functions of marriage, let's say we had some time warp, not to the almost the equivalent of 50s. I mean, people would just be, jumping into that. And I think the lessons we've learned from second wave feminism in particular would be lost. I think most people are just willing to gloss over it. You
yeah,
see this. You see this from the traditional conservative angle often. There are a lot of women trying to make amends, and Barbara Ross has talked about this extensively. And
yeah,
I mean, we don't want to acknowledge that men and women exist in a state of it's perpetual conflict. Let me just elaborate. I don't mean they're constantly at each other's throats, but rather they exist in a state of perpetually conflicting interests.
yeah,
And those interests can coincide, but sometimes they don't, and very often they don't. And they have different mating strategies because of their different biological functions. And women are not men's friends. They're not out to help men. And men, I wouldn't say are even women's friends, but they're certainly willing to help women. Um,
yeah,
so if we don't take to heart the lessons we've learned over the last few decades, and if we don't take to heart some of the lessons we've learned online in our exploration of some of these subjects and topics, we're going to pay a price later on
yeah,
because we'll just have some sort of cyclical thing going on whereupon get rid of feminism, you have some sort of pseudo nuclear family patriarchal structure, and then that'll devolve into the next thing. Now, and you mentioned
yeah,
this in your video, one of your recent videos about birth control. And I agree, I consider birth control or any technological innovation to be part of this mechanization effect. And in
yeah,
the most recent video that I made yesterday or the other day, someone asked, well, why would you have to control birth control? I mean, if you really wanted to set back all this stuff and get rid of government, blah, 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 why would you? Well, it seems a no-brainer. Birth
yeah,
control next to all the, next to political franchise, I mean, gave women total freedom, potentially, almost total
mm,
freedom, to do what they want, to have sexual partners, as many as they want, to not have sexual. I mean, they had these options.
yeah,
And that didn't exist. I mean, the risk of pregnancy was just far, far higher prior to birth control. And so the entirety of society, in
yeah.
some ways, bent to that. There was a superstructure that was imposed on society because of women getting pregnant, as opposed to, uh, you can't get pregnant anymore, so because you use birth control,
I,
anything goes.
I think I basically said this in the video that you're referring to is that essentially if you look back 100 years ago, the form of like birth control back then, like to practice safe sex, that was marriage. Like marriage was literally the action you took to have safe sex back then. Um, that's no longer the case. I really think that the lifelong pair bonding is pretty much. I mean, it's biologically obsolete at this point.
Oh, absolutely,
It
absolutely.
it had a purpose back then, but now, in the world of easily available, you know, first it was the pill, and then you had like the hormonal IUD.
The chips, the injections, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's just getting easier and easier. They're lasting longer and longer. They're being, I mean, but it's the same thing with voting. I mean, once that genie's out of the bottle, there's no putting it back in. You can't. I
Can't
mean,
put toothpaste back into the tube.
yeah, yeah. I mean, no, no. I mean, ethical concerns aside, I don't think men or women would ever want to give up birth control at this point.
Yeah, which leads us to the question about male birth control. I just,
Yeah,
there are some men
well,
interested in it, but there are not enough men interested in it.
I think. from my experience, most men I talk to are interested in it. If there was a male pill or if Vassal gel was available tomorrow, I think a lot of men would utilize it. I just think the one of the problems is that men's rights is such a taboo topic. It's not something like if you bring it up in conversation, they'll be like, yeah, I use a birth control pill. That'd be great. But they're not going to bring that up in conversation with their girlfriend or whatever at the dinner table. Like that's not a it's not something that I think most guys would actively.
Speaking, and it's interesting. Speaking of which, I want to just make an addendum here to have you ever had an interesting conversation with a woman? Have you ever had a conversation with a woman where you felt free to say anything you wanted without being restricted? That's another important aspect. Uh, when
No.
you have a conversation with a female, whether it's a wife, an ex-wife, an acquaintance, you are dancing on eggshells. I've seen this. Never seen a single exception. I'll give you an example.
Mm,
The place where I used to work, I had a colleague who was actually a very nice woman. And when I was ill in the hospital or after my surgery, she visited me and she helped me out every now and then. But have a conversation about certain things, call into account certain of her irrational beliefs, and forget about it. All bets are off. So,
yeah.
this is another aspect, this constant need to be quote unquote sensitive to the needs and of women, not offending people.
Mm,
This is look, people think I'm somehow opposed to, I'm not right, left, but you have to say, I mean, we read on this, the left is kind of often very much thought police, don't offend anyone, don't say this. We've talked about this as well, that
yeah.
there, for example,
Have you seen the latest one? There's a whole bunch of people: Condoleezza Rice, Beyonce. I think what's the lady in charge of Facebook at the moment? Sandberg. Um, they've started a new campaign to ban the word bossy.
what?
They want to ban the word bossy.
I don't know why.
Well, apparently because it's, I don't know, it stops women growing up to become leaders or something ridiculous.
I don't even think ridiculous suits at that. It's just I'm I'm baffled. I don't have words for it. It's just wow. But yeah, constantly the left. And look, it might be a good opportunity to talk about politics now a little bit. That it's clear. I mean, the left they don't like calling a spade a spade.
No.
And I recommended the Blank Slate to you. You listened to it or to the audiobook, and he
Yeah,
talks about this
I'm
as
a,
well.
yeah, I'm about two-thirds of the way through it at the
So
moment,
you've
so I
already
haven't quite
digested a lot
finished
of
it yet.
the material. Well, I mean, he talks
Yeah,
about this as well, that um, in the desire not to offend, the desire not
mm,
to label, they're just giving up objectivity.
yeah,
Now, on the other hand, I don't think the right is necessarily interested in objectivity, but they're less concerned about offending,
mm,
if I might put it that way. But yeah,
yeah,
I mean, being afraid to say that there are differences between people, that I mention this often because there are no longer good grounds to oppose the notion that, for example, Jamaican sprinters of West African origin have certain inherent genetic gifts that
mm,
allow them to run faster. And the idea that you look at the division of sports and what kind of ethnic groups tend to participate in what sport and whatnot. This is also apparent.
yeah,
It's very very rare that you see, for example, people of African descent participate in these strongman competitions. What you see often are East Europeans, Scandinavians. Most of the time, it's people of this background. So
yeah,
uh, just the idea they're really everyone is the same. It's ludicrous. Now, but the important thing is you don't to treat people fairly, and I think that's what we all would want ideally, to be treated fairly, is not the
mm,
same thing as saying we're all the same, we're all identical, there are no differences between people, and so on and so forth. And this is something the left is a a blockade in. They do not, left-wing leaning people don't even want to acknowledge that there are differences between men, women, ethnic groups. I mean, it's all a social construct, effectively.
Yeah.
And scientists who participate in this are really disgraceful, I think. I
Mm.
think scientists, by their very nature, should be post-political. They shouldn't be interested. They might have political ideas or an agenda, but they should really put that aside when they're looking at the data.
Yeah. I think most of the scientists in the harder sciences are. I think the split seems to occur somewhere between sociology and psychology.
Well, this is a fascinating topic. I mean, this is, someone who's formerly from the atheist community, you might know. Did I ever mention I'm still a moderator on the Sam Harris forums? I am, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Way back in the day when I was youngish, yeah. But this is a fast. I mean, this I've seen these questions in forums and openly discussed online as well, in video format. Look at what do I mean? Oh, right. The conversation between Jonathan Miller, the retired neurologist and
Yeah.
playwright. He's a brilliant guy, English guy. He had with Steven Weinberg, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, and they had this
Mm.
conversation. I'm just paraphrasing it. You know, why is it that people are less bothered by, say, a heliocentric universal model, um, as opposed to some of the discoveries of Darwinism and evolution. Now, it, evolution crosses into what we are, whereas the planet
Mm.
is floating out there. Everything that's sort of external to human beings, people are willing to
Mm.
accept. Now, you'll see this is very interesting, say in the Middle East, that they're all on board with chemistry, not biochemistry, but chemistry,
Mm.
physics, engineering. They're all on board for that. They think it's great. But come biology, and particularly in aspects of chemistry that are related to biology, you have to kind of they tend to avoid that.
Mm.
There's something just inflammatory to most people about calling human beings apes or animals, which we are, and just
I
stating
think
that
it comes.
exactly.
I I think you mentioned a couple of times. I think you were saying you were going to touch on it in your next video. I think it comes back to the idea of like innate, innate physics,
Yeah, I don't want to.
innate biology.
I don't want to. Yes, I'm going to be working on a video about innate inclinations people have. Although
Mm.
I don't agree. I don't agree with you on this. Actually, I don't think people's
Yeah.
uh, the offense that people take at socio-biological observations or evolutionary psychological or biological observations, I don't think that has anything to do with our innate sense of the science of the world. It's not that it runs.
Well,
Okay. Well, I think it's a genuinely separate issue. I think it's a sense of specialness. People feel special.
mm,
I don't know how
yeah.
much our innate and often deceptive scientific sense of the world uh, is is really related to our sense of feeling special. I think that's more to
Well,
do with our higher cognitive functions ultimately.
I think I guess if I was talking about innate biology or innate physiology, I would include the innate sort of understanding of mind body duality into that.
Okay, we
I
can
think
have a conversation about that. Absolutely. I think there is some evidence to suggest that human beings are naturally inclined towards some form of Cartesian dualism, for lack of a better description. And
yeah.
but
Uh,
it's the reason, but you have to look. So we have to ask the question why, or what's the reason for this? The research I've looked at suggests that the reason for this is um, the almost what would seem to be an almost necessary continuity of consciousness upon the extinction of human life. I mean, one second you're talking to Bob and he's telling you about his next project and these equations he's worked out, and I don't know, he got the headhunter trophy in some game or whatever, and then you get a call tomorrow and Bob's not there anymore, And why wouldn't the continuity of consciousness be there? I mean, he was, you were hanging out with him, having a drink, and you're talking about stuff, and Bob's not there anymore, but he'll come back,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this is now. I think that's part of it. It is our higher cognitive functions that are sort of misleading us there.
Mm.
And I think people confuse the fact that we are unique animals, and I mean, I acknowledge this for reasons I cited in Escape Velocity. We acknowledge this, but we don't acknowledge it in the right way. Yes, we have higher
No.
cognitive function. We're still an animal. We still suffer the fates of other animals. We're still part of
Yeah.
the big biosphere. This does
Yeah.
not separate us from the biosphere into which we were born and within which we developed and evolved over time.
Yeah. I guess like the way I sort of see it is that as soon as you start telling people that they are essentially biological machines, destined to run the course of physical determinism, I think that really does contradict heavily with that innate sense of of mind body duality. I mean, I guess it's like even atheists I know, a lot of atheists I know still believe in the soul and the such like,
Okay,
and
and you're
that
touching on
that
something
kind of
very important. Let's talk about determinism. I mean, this might be a good opportunity to talk about. I mean, in no topic I've ever broached that I feel the amount of sort of resistance or maybe even hostility, not just
mm,
from my subscriber base, but also I think just in general in real life. When I talk about issues of free will and determinism, there's more hostility towards the idea of a lack of free will, which, the evidence that we've discussed is just immense that we don't have free will, but there's so
yeah,
much hostility towards that idea, no matter whom you talk to. And I mean, you're right. To say something we're just biological machines, and we do run on autopilot, some more than others, but we are automatons. I mean, we are the byproducts. Let's be frank. I mean, any causal account of the universe does not. You cannot have a causal account of the universe and still believe in some conventional form of free will.
no,
You know, you were born in the penal colony. I was born in New York. Person X was born in Tokyo. Another person was born in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. This is one example. We were born to certain parents, then endowed us with certain genes, likewise for them, and so on and so forth.
yeah,
Our ability to achieve is limited by our genome, and I mean all these things. It's absurd to even think that. Never mind the numerous or maybe almost incalculable number of neurological processes going on in our minds, even as we speak, as we produce thought and speech, and we're completely unaware of them, and we don't know how we're being stimulated, and we don't know the reasons why we can't. Neither of us can give a particular account why we're reacting to each other's words in a specific way. Any introspection on this topic will yield very quickly the answer that free will is a complete illusion. I
yeah,
wish we could get past that. Apparently we can't, because the more
yeah,
interesting question I pose to you as well is that now we acknowledge that there's no evidence for any kind of conventional free will, I'll call it that, or there's no evidence for what we believe to be free will, that we're just free agents able to do whatever we want. I mean, what's the interesting question is the illusion of free will so important? I think it's inherent. What you're talking about now, I think free will is bound up in a belief in Cartesian dualism, because
yeah,
what you have is Cartesian dualism. I mean, implied, of course, is something that's not bound within a physical system. We are physical systems within other physical systems, and Cartesian dualism would tell you that we're a physical system, but the mind, the spirit, the soul, whatever. In German, there's one word that covers it both. Geist, you probably know it. You're always hearing the term
yeah,
Zeitgeist. The Geist is somehow separate and external to that, and thus not bound by physicality, and of course would not then fit into the causal chain that gave birth to our physical forms. And that idea is of course bound up with the idea of autonomy of the person, and that is very difficult to shake off. Even people
yeah,
who seem on board with you know, being biological systems within a chemical and physical system,
Yeah.
tend to just either come up with all kinds of rationalizations or just refuse to believe it, or I don't know.
I think it's just like in a lot of people's cases, it's just double think really. Like they just people are very good at compartmentalizing. I know, like I said, I know atheists that accept biological evolution but still believe in a soul.
Right.
Um, it's it seems to be it seems to be innate that people believe in that mind body duality. But I guess I mean that would be my answer as to why people have a problem with biology more so than hard science like Newtonian physics.
Well,
I think
they're not connecting the dots. I mean, the reason why, one of the reasons why we don't have free will is because of things like Newtonian. It's because of the physical
hmm,
principles that govern the universe, and that ties
yeah,
biological systems are, uh, physics yields to chemistry, chemistry yields to biology. It is an unend, it's a chain.
yeah,
It's like a chain of command, if you will, if you will. But And many things would change, but some things wouldn't if we just all woke up one day and acknowledged that we don't have free will. But
yeah,
maybe the illusion is so important. Maybe it's so. I think, in my experience, trying to have conversations with people about it, it's so important that it just needs to be part of the system.
yeah,
I think if we acknowledge that free will is an illusion, aspects, not all of it, of the justice system would be altered as well. We would
hmm,
talk less about responsibility and more about consequence, which I think is more important. I mean, the idea
yeah,
of we talk about personal responsibility, but it in the context of of scientifically observing a lack of free will, the idea of personal responsibility is well, kind of silly. I mean,
hmm,
the neither of us would be, probably at least, very unlikely having this conversation if we were born in Mogadishu, Somalia. You know,
yeah,
that little change, quirk in our fate, that you happen to be born in the penal colony and I in French fry land. That changed everything, in a sense.
yeah,
And you know, or one of us could have a tumor, and that would affect our neurology to the point where we become sociopathic serial killers. I mean,
yeah,
where's the personal responsibility in that?
hmm,
It's it's very strange, but you're absolutely right about compartmentalization. Human beings are just extremely adept at compartmentalizing things, and you see this in science. You know Francis Collins, of course, right?
I know the name.
Oh, he was the head of the Human Genome Project,
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
both a medical doctor
He
and
was a
a PhD.
Christian, yeah,
He is an evangelical Christian who has
yeah,
I think it's a PhD in molecular biology, and he's also or biochemistry, one of the two, and he's also a medical doctor.
yeah,
Yet supposedly it's just, if you want to know how easy it is to compartment, I mean, look at Isaac Newton. I mean, he was a brilliant mind, but he was a lunatic too. He think that he thought the Bible was some mystic book, and that
mm,
he could calculate all kinds of magical properties based on chapters in the Bible and things like that.
yeah,
Um, Even really smart people far more intelligent than either of us, get conned by our tendency to compartmentalize things.
yeah,
But I think it would be actually a relief to humanity. For me, going back a couple of years when it finally dawned upon me, the illusion that is, I became less concerned about stuff. I began literally sleeping better in a sense, because I've had insomnia. I still have it. I just think it's endemic to me. But things that used to bother me, whether they be minutia or something far greater, it just makes you a little bit more relaxed about things. And it's not that you
yeah,
stop doing stuff. You just there's no reason to be upset, as I like to say. And I think people, maybe I should clarify this. When I talk about the gods, how many times people ask me if I'm polytheist. One aspect is I do it tongue in cheek. I mean, the idea when I say something, Zeus go with you, I say it because it sounds just as ridiculous as saying God go with you. But that's one part of it.
yeah,
the other part of it is the gods aren't the gods. They're just kind of all these causal factors that began presumably with the Big Bang and led up to here. All these things that we cannot account for, and we can't take any responsibility for. And so,
Yeah,
we are unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, marionettes of the gods, of the stars, of the fates.
yeah,
Very famously in Shakespeare wrote in a conversation with Julius Caesar in his play. The fate, dear Caesar, sorry, the fault, dear Caesar, lies not in the stars, but in ourselves. But that's actually not entirely accurate, ironic. And I think so. There,
no,
once again, you see this sort of this idea that we're autonomous agents. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, this is a really inflammatory topic. I suspect the reactions to this aspects of the conversation will be less than positive. Um,
yeah,
but
probably.
probably, but it's a credit to you that you possess. Well, not really. It's that's the other thing. You can't really credit people with
Yeah,
stuff either. I mean, that's another. It's a good thing that you. It's a good thing that you're able to acknowledge it because it helps. It helps living. It makes life easier to live. I think when you
yeah,
let go of all the sort of tension that arises from. This will make no sense unless I actually explain it. The bicycle chain mentality. There's an idiom in German that goes uh, could have, should have, bicycle chain, meaning it doesn't make sense in English because it rhymes in German, but meaning if you had chained the bicycle to the pole, it would not have been stolen.
yeah,
That whole could have, would have, should have mentality uh, that plagues many people would be left behind, and ideally,
mm,
and we're still human. I even sometimes have that, thoughts of that, but it makes life easier to live, and it doesn't stop you from pursuing your goals.
no,
Because I think when you don't consciously acknowledge it or recognize it, you kind of auto shift into
mm,
the illusion of the self and the illusion of sort of being an autonomous agent. It just automatically happens. You
yeah,
know, you're standing in a queue, for example, and you get upset for someone bumping you and spilling your coffee, even though, rationally speaking, there's no reason to be upset, but you just
mm,
kind of fall into that. I think that's another thing. Um, I don't know. Well, I don't know. This is something we could talk about. What the relationship of the mind, the Cartesian dualism, the mind body duality to the illusion of the self. I think this is of course not the identical to the issues of free will, but the idea of a complete self, of selfhood. I mean, think
mm,
about what we are composed of. Our molecules, and then once you go to the bigger stuff, the cells, and it's still bigger
yeah,
stuff, the tissue, and when you realize, just on a simply on a molecular basis, the Colttaine 5 years ago was a completely different not completely perhaps, but very different Colttaine from the Colttaine of today. Likewise,
yeah,
for Stardust, the evolving thoughts that this idea of the continuity of the self, there you go. I think that's the answer
mm,
to the question of this innateness is that we are hardwired to falsely believe in a uh, in a concept of selfhood, in an illusion of the self, when there is no self.
mm,
We are just sort of disparate thoughts. They seem to just evolve. We can't explain whence they come. We can't explain why they go. Uh,
mm,
Oftentimes, our own decisions are mysterious to us. And the self, for example, ties up to this idea of a distinct mind or a distinct spirit kind of floating out there, rather than simply a physical system that's governed
mm,
by physical laws and chemical reactions.
yeah. I mean, if I was going to um, to describe it, I would essentially say that the self is an emergent property of you know, the electrochemical processes of the brain.
Yeah, undoubtedly, yeah.
And I mean, it's emergent. I mean, and for most people, I don't think I mean, if you want to run on autopilot, that's fine. I don't even think people need to have that deep of an understanding of free will and stuff. It just worries me when you get, you know, like the feminists with their whole like everybody's equal, and they act like I don't understand actively trying to force people into professions they wouldn't otherwise want to do to basically make a point. One of the interesting studies I've seen is it was a cross national study of something like 200,000 participants across 60 countries or something, and they
Right.
actually found that the more egalitarian the country,
Right. This has
um,
been well documented. Yes.
yeah, the more egalitarian the country, the wider the gender gaps are, because it's just biology. Men are more interested in engineering, women are more interested
Things.
in
I think they call
professions
it
like,
things and people. Men are more interested in things, and and women are more interested
yeah,
in people. But this is fascinating because I think I've always been an oddity as a male. It's not that I'm not interested in things. I am, but my
mm,
interest in thinginess applies more to people, if you will. That's why I've had this deep
yeah,
interest for years now in evolutionary biology. Is say, what is the thinginess? This is a very German strategy of describing things, to make creating abstract nouns. What is the thingness of humans? And I try to be
yeah,
objective about it and try to understand humans as things uh,
mm,
rather than people. Quite honestly, I look at them as kind of objects in the biological cosmos. And I think
yeah,
that that's still a very different approach from a sort of a peopleness perspective.
yeah,
And so even when I do seem interested in a subject, the same thing with the humanities. This could be interesting for some subs. So I come originally from a background of what I would describe as the hard humanities. That might sound like a joke, but I was trained originally as a classicist, studying ancient Greek and Latin, and that is pretty rigorous. I'm not saying it's an equivalent of higher mathematics, but put it this way: 75% of the people dropped out by the junior year, and
yeah,
I was always interested in meter and poetic meter, and how does this work? I was interested in the grammatical relations of this is how I got into linguistics originally,
yeah,
the grammatical parts of speech and how that all kind of tied into. So it was kind of an interest in the humanities, but from a thingness perspective. And
mm,
whereas people who were just doing, I don't know, English lit studies were kind of, I don't know what they were doing, to be honest, but it was always kind of the technical aspects that interested me the most. And once we got
mm,
into sort of pseudo psychobabble literary analysis, I quickly lost interest in it. I liked
yeah,
studying poetic meter. I liked studying rhetorical techniques and how that works on a mechanical basis with manipulating the language. But I never really could get into the psychobabble. I just felt nauseating, even though I was forced to do some of it. I had no choice. And it
yeah,
showed, by the way, it showed having been forced to do, I guess, left-wing Marxist, if you will, psychobabble, because I ended up finishing my degree in classics in German originally. And German, I could only do so much linguistic kind of technical stuff, and I had to do literary nonsense as well. But the
mm,
fact is that you could, at least in my experience, come up with any sort of bullshit you wanted and somehow create a rationalization for it and just
yeah,
character X, blah blah blah, because Y, because I don't know, some the oppression of blah blah. You just kind of you could literally do, and I would get A's for it. And I just thought to
yeah,
myself when I finished, holy shit, I just wrote a paper about nothing, effectively,
mm,
and then when I actually got into linguistic syntax, which was really rigorous, it just you had to give demonstrations like proofs of mathematics. You would use these syntax trees, and it was just a very different thing. But
yeah,
this is by the way, this is one of my great grievances that the humanities have been polluted. Pinker talks about this later on that you could have actual literary analysis the way kind of Smudboy does,
yeah,
or you can just have psychobabble. You can just make shit up on the fly. You can talk about whatever you want with
mm,
no structure to it. And unfortunately, it is that the hard humanities are kind of moving away from that. But
mm,
I don't know how I got on this tangent, but yeah, right. So even if
yeah,
you're interested in more, I think as a male, more traditional subjects, it was always
yeah.
the thingness aspect as opposed to the people aspect
Mm.
interesting more. And
Well,
I yeah.
yeah, I guess getting back to, like, free will and the self being an emergent property of the brain,
Hmm.
like, I just think, like, you're going to have some people that are good at mathematics, and they will naturally choose to go down that path because they're good at mathematics. And if you're good at something, you tend to enjoy doing it. It's
Exactly.
you know, it's and the same thing. Like, if you get a kid that's good at music, they're gonna want to spend most of their time doing that because they're good at it, and pursue that. I just
Yeah,
think
and I actually
it's
think there's a. It's when you mentioned this. I'm thinking of my friend, the chosen one, a fellow Australian, who was I
mm,
think he's about 18 now.
yeah,
He's quite literally a genius, but because of his aptitude for physics and maths and just all things programming related, I see there
mm,
seems to be a kind of an inverse growth relation to your aptitude to how much you pursue it. I mean, because he's so skilled at mathematics and so apprehensive of he can apprehend everything. It seems to me that he pursues it far more rigorously than someone who would just be kind of good at it, you know.
yeah,
And his ability to understand ever more complex. I mean, he's outstripped his own teachers. He has to go weird online courses because his teachers are just not as good as he is. You
mm,
know, he can understand the next step, the next level, and there are no real blockades to his understanding. So that just serves as a natural kind of freeway, if you will, to just keep on
yeah,
pushing ahead. Whereas an average person would come across many more blockades. They certainly wouldn't be besting their own teachers, and
yeah. But I
they
mean, they're still going to have things that they're good at.
right, but
I mean,
exactly, but that's exactly my point. They might be world-class sprinters. It's
mm,
I often make this analogy to give a concrete example that you and I could do, even if we were in our primes, which we're not, hill sprints for the rest of our lives, and I'm willing to bet the farm that neither of us would ever be competing at the Olympics.
mm.
Um, just because we
But
don't have the stuff, we don't have the genes, effectively.
yeah, but I mean, this is one of those, like, I mean, what it comes back to is, I mean, I think this whole the way education is done at the moment, that the blank slate, the idea that you know everybody, if they work hard enough, can become an engineer or become president or become
Right.
Usain Bolt, and it's just not the case. Like, people have differences, and they are going to naturally grow into their differences. I
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's not always a clear path. I mean, if people ask me to this day what I want to do in my life, I honestly couldn't tell them. I have so many diverse, mostly intellectual interests that
Yeah.
and even now I'm contemplating in a few years' time pursuing a PhD just for, might be useful for financial reasons later to get a better salary and so on. I don't even know what subjects I should be pursuing, to be honest. There are different subjects that interest me, and some of my old subjects interest me less. And it's not always a clear path, but yes, absolutely. Some people just like my economics friend I mentioned, the one kind of who can't just move the purple
Yeah.
pillar. I mean, this guy, like I said, he used to best his own professors. He would, he would just say, "Oh no, you're actually wrong about that particular econometrics thing," and yeah, I mean, these people are rare, but they do exist, and
Mm.
they just have natural talent, and not everyone can do that. Not everyone can perform the animation feats that you can perform as Colttaine, for example.
Mm.
I would even argue in that area, or well, certainly the case of the chosen one. I've never
Yeah.
encountered a mind like his, particularly in his at his age. It's just
Yeah.
it's just baffling. He's clearly operating on almost a different plane of existence than most of us. And
Yeah.
it's interesting though. I'm sure he won't take. I'm not naming names here, but he was telling me how his parents, because he's pretty young. He's finishing up his high school years, and his parents had wanted him initially. I told him to talk to them about it, and offer counter reasons, but said he should be doing, just for a couple of months or maybe a year, take a year just to do some kind of physical labor like sweeping floors or cleaning or working. I told the chosen one, I said, no, 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 this is not what you're supposed to be doing. You should be at the very least, maybe giving mathematics and physics tuition so you can, earn. You're kind of using your. No, that's not something you should be doing. And
Yeah.
even in his case, his parents, who I imagine acknowledge his superior intellect, just don't think. And you know what they told him? They said, because you should learn what it's like for the rest of us. But my point to the chosen one was, you're not like the rest of us. I mean, I have no
Yeah,
problem admitting that he's far more intelligent than I am. I
yeah,
have done physical manual labor. I mean, I'm the kind of, I would be more appropriate for, sweeping the floors or whatever than he would be. And so, um,
yeah. I
it's
don't even see the point, frankly. I mean,
oh,
after 18 years, your personality's already pretty well set. I mean, 6 months of sweeping floors is not going to drastically change
well,
your
no, but
views of the world.
effectively they want to teach him that, how,
They
um,
want to teach him humility, is
it's
what
something
they want
like
to do.
that. It's just silly. I mean, this guy should be striving for the stars, and his parents ideally should be encouraging him in this, as opposed to saying, you should get to know how shitty it is for the rest of us. Well, okay, but what's the point? How does he grow as a person? I mean, I my analogy I gave him, and I told him he should tell his parents that is this is, you don't need to be tortured to know it's not a good idea to be tortured. You don't need to
Yeah,
experience firsthand, having an iron brand put on your skin to think
yeah,
probably it's not the best idea. And even if you did experience it, you're going to learn that you hate it. Yeah, well, I probably could have told you that without actually having experienced it either. I,
yeah,
so I think, yeah, people are very different, and people are. I think luck. I mean, we talk luck is the definitive factor in life. I mean, we're all lucky in some regards, and in some regards we're not.
yeah,
Whether you fall ill or not, where you're born, who your parents were, what kind of genes you have. It's
yeah,
life just comes down to luck. And
yeah,
in my country of origin, the United States, I'm sure you have this in Australia as well. But this idea of the self-made man, there's this concept
yeah,
where when you actually look
yeah,
at the self, well, you could just look at the dozens of variables that had to be in place for this so-called self-made man to come into being.
yeah,
And for example, people cite Oprah. It's fascinating. Oprah as, she was born in a poverty, a family of 2,000 children or something like that, and
yeah,
she's a multi-billionaire. Okay. She obvious for whatever reason, she had the wherewithal in her unique makeup, she was able to do that.
mm,
That's not evidence whatsoever that anyone under those circumstances, or most people under those circumstances, are going to be multi-billionaires.
yeah. Well, I mean that's my problem with it is that it's I think about most things. I'm a numbers guy, and I think about a lot of things in probability. Sort of like how would you play it? How would this probability go in like a Vegas casino? I mean, I actually find it worrying that um, I suppose it's like they colloquially refer to it as the American dream. Um, it's pretty much the same everywhere. This idea that if you work hard enough, you can become a multi-billionaire as well. The the number of people that actually reach that is so infinitesimally small. Like most rich people have some level of inheritance. Like the number of people that are self-made millionaires is so infinitesimally small that if you were to play those odds in a Vegas hotel, like it's probably not that that American dream, as it were, is probably not a good basis to be
Yeah,
living
and
your
you
life
would
by.
certainly need the requisite neurology. You would need a certain makeup, your mind would
Yeah,
have to work in a certain way. And
yeah,
the presumption, of course, is that everyone's mind in principle is the same, and so everyone can
yeah,
do just that.
yeah. But I mean, when you present it in like a social wide, this is the American dream to make it, everyone has the chance to make it big. You're essentially you're essentially creating a system where you're encouraging people to live their lives as though they're going to win a 1 in a million like jackpot, and that's
Well, I'd argue
I don't know
it's a
if
lot
that's the
worse than 1 in a million in the case of becoming a billionaire. But yeah, I mean, well, I think
probably, but I mean,
this is a discussion I've had with people about deception with regards to sort of children.
yeah,
You know, we tell children that, we tell Timmy he can be whatever he wants to be. Now, I'm not trying to be necessarily negative, but rather than just saying, maybe we should all be telling Timmy, find out what your strengths are, find out what you enjoy, and just, do it. Rather than saying he's feeding these fantasies to children
yeah,
about the nature of reality, and of course, adults live
yeah,
fantasies
absolutely,
as well. Adults live. I mean, you just mentioned one fantasy, the American dream, and look. unfortunately, I think a lot of the subs I have might be offended by this stuff, and we're talking some pretty
I
honest
don't know.
core stuff. But
This I tend to find I often clash with, I mean, particularly Americans, because Australia is a much more socialized country. So, I mean,
well, I mean,
there's a lot of
we
things
have
being an
for
outsider.
the record, we differ politically. I'm much more
Yeah.
of a libertarian bent, and you're much more what seems to be of a socialist bent. We were actually talking
Mm.
about this, but we can still have a good conversation. That this is not
Yeah.
possible in the realm of mystery or Chapin, for example.
No.
This
No.
is leftist, collectivist.
Yeah.
But well, it's
But
well. Speaking of political systems, well, that's the thing. Let's say we actually, this is just total hypothetical kind of brain theory crafting. But
yeah.
let's say we actually had a civilization or society someplace that took into account a lack of human autonomy, of the elements of chance. I mean, you would have to have a political system. This is why, and one reason I've never mentioned this, but one reason why I just don't like. I mean, I don't even know what the best political system is, and I would never be
Mm.
stupid enough to make the claim. Why? Because the political systems that exist now are all reflective of our intuitive science, of the
Yeah.
delusions and illusions we project onto reality, rather than examining things objectively. As I said,
Yeah.
we all shift into the illusion of the self and the illusion of the autonomous mind as well. Like I said, when I'm standing in the queue and someone spills coffee on me, I'm angry at the guy who spills coffee on me, and I'm pissed off that it's taking so long. The queue is taking. I mean, we all shift into that, and I don't think there's a single coherent political philosophy, and I've been wanting to say this for a long time, that ever bore into mind um, the fact that, that yeah, there is a lack of autonomy. I mean,
Mm.
so pretty much every
I
political
think,
system we have is flawed, is severely flawed for that reason.
yeah, I think, I think they do kind of, in a way, like unconsciously, uh, sort of reflect these sorts of things. Like, I mean, when I look at, I mean, we're going on like complete extreme ends of the spectrum here, but I mean, if you were to say like anarcho-capitalism versus communism, like Marxist communism, they're both kind of reflections of, I mean, if you went back to, the days of hunter-gatherers, on the one side you've got, what's good for the tribe, and on the other side you've got what's good for the individual. I mean, they're
Right.
essentially like hunter-gatherer, what's like biological, like social tribe
Absolutely,
biology
absolutely.
scaled up to hundreds of millions of people.
No, absolutely. I mean,
And
that's
it's
they would have to be. Where else would they come from? These things don't
mm,
come about in a vacuum. But
yeah,
I still, I can't make, I don't know what the best political system is because
no,
none of the political systems takes into account the actuality of human reality, the reality that we live in, the reality of
no,
being a physical system within a greater physical system.
yeah,
The fact that you can be born with some really shit luck, and then people, and it doesn't make sense to blame someone for that. It really doesn't. I mean,
yeah,
uh, you can be born in some of the worst circumstances possible, and compared to people like that, we're just incredibly lucky. Or
yeah,
we can say we are very misfortunate because we weren't born with Paris Hilton's inheritance,
mm.
or Bill Gates' mind, or whatever. I mean, it just works. So yeah, the American
I,
dream, I think, is it's people like living for fantasies,
yeah,
um, and for me, I mean, all I
yeah,
can say, as I mentioned in another conversation, I mean, I certainly would like to. One reason I would like to shrink government to some degree, not eliminate everything, would be because there's a lack of responsibility, and it's just it's when the bigger something is, the harder it is to keep track of it.
yeah,
Never mind failed things. I mean, the Department of Education in the United States has really just failed in whatever its mandate was supposed to be. The
mm,
DEA, the drug war, most people can agree on that aspect as well. We don't need a
yeah,
DEA. So there are definitely things, but I don't know what the best system is, and I think that's just me being intellectually honest. Now, if you get a guy like
yeah,
Stefan Molyneux,
yeah,
Stefan Molyneux, look, he's no doubt a smart guy, but his entire fortune is based on peddling a particular brand of libertarianism, and
yeah,
he has to effectively be right in order to continue
mm,
making money, which is fine. You know,
yeah,
everyone makes their money in some way, shape, or form.
mm,
But it makes him also, he's simply then not amenable to anything that might counter the data that he has.
yeah,
And for example, let's be honest. I mean, does a libertarian society make a whole lot of sense in the context of uh, lack of autonomous mind or lack of free will, to put it more simply? Not really.
no,
But it also the luck factor, the fact that luck is the essentially the be all and end all of these things, also makes this heavily socialized system nonsense as well, because this idea that you
yeah,
can equalize everything is equally absurd. Just as
yeah,
libertarian idea that everyone can kind of gun ho it and go on the rough and just, yeah, we're just going to make it, that's absurd. But then
yeah,
the idea that everyone's the same and you can somehow fix the inequities and the lack of equality in the world is equally insane. So you really, what
yeah.
system do we work with there? It doesn't seem to be a very good system at the end of the day. Maybe
I think
scientists can work it out.
well, I don't think that's possible. I mean, the problem with treating politics as a hard science that can be objectively broken down is that ultimately, like politics comes down to making decisions, and every decision politically, is going to be good for some people and bad for others. I don't think there is a perfect system that is going to make everyone happy, and as a result, I mean, yeah, I don't if I had to guess, I think the reason why democracy is the worst form of government after all the others is essentially democracy is essentially about trying to do the most amount of good for the most people.
That's a form of utilitarianism. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I don't. I mean, and that's essentially what we're coming down to, because there is no political system that is going to yield political decisions that are going to make everyone happy all of the time. Like there is, I mean, just look at like the difference, like with the whole um, socialist versus libertarian thing. I mean, socialism is good for women, libertarianism is good for men. I mean, given the option, why would women want to go to a libertarian system?
Well, like I
I
said,
mean,
you
why
could
would
force them at gunpoint, but
well, you could. I mean, that would violate the non-aggression principle,
exactly. So
but
that's why I think the libertarians
it's
are in a bind on this.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think they're both in a bind. I mean, the one system favors one group of people and they want it that way, and
Well,
the other
it's the Colttaine, with
disfavors
all
the
due
others.
respect, they're both in a bind, but because men are always willing to curry favor with women and ingratiate
Yeah,
themselves towards women, men let this happen. Men let
yeah,
the government growth take place. They could have resisted it, but they wanted favors in the form of votes and so on. I mean, all of this stuff happened because men permitted it to happen. Uh,
yeah,
I'm not placing, it's not even a question of blame. Blame, of course, given things we've talked about, doesn't make sense, but these are consequences, you know, cause and effect.
mm,
And let it happen. They were much more partial to helping women out, letting women have what they want. Women are much
yeah,
less partial to letting men have what they want. So
yeah.
we're not working on an equal footing in the sense
No,
that women have never been very partial to letting men have what they want, and men have always been very partial to letting women have what they want.
yeah. I
So
mean, I get that. I was sort of talking in a bit more of a detached, sort of
yeah, no,
a detached
absolutely.
manner, simply
Let's
to
take it
point
that
out that
way. Yeah, they're both. I mean, yeah, they're just two.
one
But this
one
also
political system is
this illustrates the conflict between men's and women's interests perfectly. I mean,
yeah,
you have the fairy tale of, you know, being these partners and some sort of celestial love bond or some nonsense like that, and when
yeah,
the reality is there are some very very serious conflicting interests for both
mm,
parties. And
yeah,
you know, the best we could do, in my opinion, is to be objective and rational about it and just try to, I mean, honestly, if it were up to me, all this stuff would just be turn into a private business contract. There would be, if you really want to go that route, I don't even want to be in a relationship, but with certain obligations, you know, man does X, woman does Y, so on and so forth,
yeah,
you know, and whatever,
yeah,
for a man, it'd probably be regular sex. For a woman, it would be, you know, bring home a certain amount of money, whatever.
mm,
There's no, I don't know what
yeah. I
else
mean,
could there be, you know?
yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things. I mean, I suppose one of the hot hot button issues in society these days is gay marriage, and I'm like, I'm against straight marriage. I think they should just eliminate the whole thing, and just, if
Yeah.
two people, if you want to sign the legal documents to have, like, give somebody medical proxy, and first your will and testimony, and um, have joint assets like a house and a car and things like that. I mean, those are all things that could exist as their own legal documents, like in a private contract. I don't see why the government has to stick their nose in and
Because
call
the
it
divorce
marriage. And
industry is very lucrative, and gay people, and particularly lesbians, divorce at a very,
yeah,
very high rate. So
yeah.
it's
Well,
money.
I wonder what would happen, if you did end up with those kind of private contracts, because I don't know what they're like in America, but in Australia, like a prenup is not considered a legal document in Australia.
Well, I
They're
know it's
not.
considered legal in the States, but it's fairly easy to overturn if there are extenuating
Yeah,
circumstances.
yeah. I guess my, like, the thing that I find interesting is that marriage is essentially a legal contract, but it's a legal contract that when it actually gets to the divorce court, it doesn't hold water. Um, I
Well,
just
right,
I
that's the
wonder.
point. I mean, you would, for people who actually want to enter in some sort of relationship or pseudo marriage, they would have to have a legally binding contract where person X does these duties and person Y the other duties. I mean, you
Yeah,
really have to
and
eliminate.
and then yeah, and then if the person doesn't do that, that is literally a breach of contract,
Right,
which can
exactly.
be
You would have
taken
to
before the
eliminate
court.
the all this fuzzy romantic nonsense, and you just have
Yeah,
to turn it into a business contract. Like I said, most men are pretty cyberitic. They have very simple sort of carnal needs. So for most
yeah,
men, I guess regular sex and blowjobs would be part of it. If the wife
yeah,
doesn't perform X amount of blowjobs, sounds ridiculous, but literally it could be in the contract.
yeah,
Then she's in breach of contract.
yeah,
If he doesn't bring home X amount of money at least by so and so date, he's in breach of contract or
yeah,
whatever. I mean, this is that I think
yeah,
that's the way it should be. I mean, we really need to get rid of all this romantic nonsense. Now,
yeah,
as for myself, I don't want to be in any relationship. So, but I was just says that's my would be my suggestion to people who want to pursue the reproductive path and the sex contract thing.
mm,
But but the way I mean, the problem is now, of course, is as I said, we've talked about it's been talked about umpteen million times. It's just blurred by this romantic silliness that we have
yeah,
gendered in society.
yeah,
Um, and how the question, and I think every time we reach this point, we both have to acknowledge the I guess the futility of it. I mean, how do we reach the point of critical mass for turning off the autopilot? I think more than anything else, that's the most important thing. And
mm,
this is not just a men's issue. This is a humanity issue.
yeah,
I think it's the key to succeeding as a species. And I don't mean
yeah.
just procreating. I mean going the extra mile, hitting Mars with our own 2 feet, and so on. Um,
I was actually, I've been thinking about it a lot since your escape velocity video. I suppose the thing I was planning to ask about was your thoughts on transhumanism, and
right.
specifically, like, bionic augmentation of humans.
Well, this is I wouldn't say a specialty, but it's certainly a favorite topic. I mean, I enjoy Deus Ex: Human Revolution,
Yeah,
which is actually a prequel to the other games, but that's all about mechanical bionic augmentation and the conflicts that arise from that.
yeah,
You have the pro-humanity group that thinks it's some great evil. You have
mm,
um, there's there's abuse as well because I mean I don't know if you're gonna play the game, so I was about to offer some spoilers, but
I don't mind about
okay.
spoilers.
So in the 2020s, they've mastered several bionic augmentation techniques to varying
Yeah,
degrees, but the human, I mean, as you can imagine, it's a lot more complex than simply attaching an arm. I mean,
yeah,
our brains for any bionic augmentation appendage that would be attached in theory to your body would have to be controlled by your computer, which is your brain.
Yeah.
Apparently, they've done this in this game, so but the problem is it's not natural, and so the body over time naturally rejects it, and they created a chemical called neuroxapine, which
Yeah.
temporarily postpones the rejection, but it's also addictive, and so there's a pharmaceutical rush to mass produce it, and they're making tons of profits. So that's another problem, even for the people who are bionically augmented. The
Mm.
protagonist, Adam Jensen, is a guy with a unique genetic component that allows his body to flawlessly accept uh, these augmentations, i.e., he's sort of the missing link. So much of the
Mm.
story revolves around figuring out this why he was attacked and all these other things.
Yeah.
Um, but you do have this scenario. I mean, blocking Mr. E seems to be very vehemently opposed towards against transhumanism. But I watched
Yeah.
his most recent video on what was it? Sexuality is a myth, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The same kind of rubbish that you hear from feminists about how it's all socially constructed.
No, well, I watched the video. He said I'm trying to remember. It wasn't really interesting. It's all just fetish. So
Okay.
homosexuality, for example, is akin to a dog humping a chair or something like that. I mean, he didn't mention the fact that homosexual brains, for example, tend to have much greater cerebral or brain symmetry as
Mm.
heterosexual females would be inclined to have, and
Yeah.
and lesbians tend to have much more asymmetry as heterosexual males tend to have. But anyway, I don't want to talk too much about Mr. I don't got into this, but yeah, there are people clearly opposed to it in reality and in the game as well. I look, I make no secret of it. I am above all probably a transhumanist. I am, I'm not interested in men's rights particularly. I think humanity needs to transcend itself to move to the next level.
Yeah.
Getting mired in the back and forth between women and men ultimately is a waste of time. And I think we should be working towards something like mechanical bionic augmentation, integrated systems where you can actually, obviously, first for people who've lost limbs, but also enhancements.
Mm.
Mr. E's objection to this, if I recall, is that there are unintended consequences. Well, my answer to that is there are always unintended consequences to everything.
Yeah.
Um, if you spill a cup of coffee, the obvious consequence is that you might have ruined, your trousers, and the unintended consequences you weren't thinking about were that maybe your carpet's also ruined because the material isn't very well suited to taking coffee spills. Everything has an unintended consequence. But the
Yeah.
idea that we should just stay the course, the autopilot course, is let me tell you why concretely I think it's no longer an option. Let's say that things had remained static with regards to the whole traditional setup. Let's just say
Yeah.
maybe continual technological innovation would have gotten to some point where we would see the flying cars in the sky by now, and many people in the 50s envisioned that just to be that way, right?
Yeah.
Um, but because of I honestly believe that because we have these huge governments, the social spending, all this stuff, and we have the conflict between men and women, which is it's just everything is reaching a climax point where
Mm.
resources are being diverted away from other possible projects. That's why I have the inspiration for the idea-driven economy. That the only way forward, truly forward, is to transcend what it even actually means to be human. In this case, transcend our animalistic nature. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about artificial intelligence yet. I'm simply talking about mechanical augmentations and certain cerebral augmentations that could be integrated into the human system.
Mm.
You know,
The thing that I've been specifically thinking about lately are things like HUD displays. Like I'm going to be particularly interested. I've always had a bit of an interest in wearable computing, and I'm going to be.
Oculus Rift,
Yeah, well, Oculus Rift is going to be an interesting VR type system,
right?
but the Google Glass is supposed to be like a discrete, like reading glasses that you have on all the time that can display things.
Right.
Um, I mean, I just wonder how that'll affect the average person that wears them. Like, it won't necessarily make them smarter in the IQ sense, but if they're in the middle of a discussion and a topic comes up that they're not as well versed on, I mean, they could have the Wikipedia page for that. They could essentially augment their knowledge base using a
Okay.
head-up display in their glasses.
In theory, but one thing I've observed is that there seems to be a kind of a strange relationship between technological profusion, accessibility of knowledge, and the lack of desire to pursue the latter. I say it all the time. I mean, we have the University of Wikipedia, and
Yeah,
nobody is taking degrees from it. It just seems that we have all this knowledge out there, but most people are just wasting their time on silly apps or Failbook or so but once again, it's an inverse relationship. The more technology we have,
yeah,
the less people are inclined to take advantage of it for the purposes of pursuing knowledge. I do it all
yeah,
the time. I mean, when I first started learning about evolutionary biology, the internet was kind of a much more minor thing. It still was kind of there, but it's only
yeah,
been really recent years that you're just fully able to capitalize on it. So
mm,
the scenario you're painting with the Google glasses assumes that the nether ape will be interested in that sort of thing. That, you know, he sees a rainbow, for example, and he says, how does that work in terms of physics?
mm,
Oh, let me just look up rainbow on the University of Wikipedia.
mm,
That's not how most people, I mean, they use Google Maps, but that's
yeah,
not how the mind tends to work. So I don't know. And then moreover, I mean, that's not an integrated system. If you look at,
mm,
say, the stuff that's talked about in Deus Ex, which is really exactly what you were talking about, these are
yeah,
integrated systems. Your
yeah,
bionic hand or arm or leg is
yeah.
being steered
I
by your brain.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of thinking, stepping stones. I think we're still a few years off that, but I mean, theoretically, Google Glasses were supposed to come out last year or this year. I think they've been delayed, but I mean, it's technology that's literally on our doorstep as opposed to sort of 20, 30,
Sure,
40
sure,
years away.
sure. Well, I mean, I'll be happy if they come out, and I probably won't be able to afford them, but is there a price tag? I don't wear glasses.
I don't know yeah, I don't know the price tag. Um,
But yeah, if it makes reading more bearable, I feel I have to part ways from paper books, but because it's just lugging them around all the time.
yeah,
But yeah, I just don't think your typical nether ape would be inclined to take advantage of things like that. I mean, we kind of have that anyway, and we have smartphones, and you can just look stuff up on a fly.
yeah,
Who does that? Who looks at a rainbow and says, "Well, I want to enrich my knowledge of the light spectrum"? Interesting.
yeah,
University of Wikipedia says the following. I mean, nobody does that. Very few, I imagine.
yeah.
They look up, restaurant locations, the Top Shop. Do you have Top Shop in Australia?
Possibly, I don't
I
know.
don't know. I didn't know about it either until my ex-wife introduced me to it, unfortunately. Things like that, clothing shops, and I mean, people,
Yeah,
particularly women. Women are the greatest users of apps, and they use it for frivolity most of the time. So
mm,
it's, I'm not too hopeful. I think once again we're coming to the point when, as we often do, that it's not looking too bright for humanity. I think we're going to
yeah,
just muddle along, and as much as I'm a transhumanist and wish we could move quickly in that direction, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Not least of which because of, well, there's some resistance, but it's just more because people people are not really learning machines. I mean, here's
mm,
one thing that's universal to almost all human beings, and regardless of what our native endowment might be, whether we're like the chosen one or some sort of happy medium or just not that bright, we can all
yeah,
learn and improve our knowledge, right?
yeah,
But human beings are not inclined to be that way.
yeah,
So the idea, I would love it, Google Glasses. Holy shit, I forgot what that fact was, or it's been years since I've studied meter, and so sometimes in poetic meter I forget terms and I have to look it up,
yeah,
and I'd love that. But
mm,
but you know, I don't think most people would see it as, I don't know, the advantage that you or I might see in that would not be seen by most, I suspect. I mean, I
yeah,
have a pretty dismal opinion of human beings in general, as you know, as probably people
yeah,
gathered. but because I just don't see evidence to suggest that human beings are particularly geared towards learning. In fact,
Mm.
I remember having a conversation a while back with Barbarossa about this sort of hypothetical scenario where it's catastrophe ensues, and these women and are just kind of starving in the streets with their frappuccinos kind of spilling out in their hands, and they don't know what to do. I mean, it's almost as if,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to get too much. We're running out of time. I don't want to get too much into the Flynn effect. That's something I might talk about eventually. But
yeah,
there a kind of by dint of the fact that everything is being done for us, basic calculations and all these things, we're
mm.
losing some basic functions for ourselves, the ability to think
Yeah,
critically. Um, if you looked, let's look at the Smud Boy thing again. I mean, you watched that Caroline video, Goodbye Caroline.
yeah, mm.
Caroline was a prototypical Nether Ape, obviously. I mean,
Yeah,
the argument, he didn't make any arguments, but the arguments he made were Nether Ape arguments. Mass Effect conveyed something. Okay, yeah, so does everything. I mean, what's your point? That
yeah,
that critical thinking. One of the reasons why Smud Boy is not very popular and some circles despise, I suspect, is because
mm.
he's actually applying some pretty rigorous analyses and also critical standards to looking at games.
Yeah,
Most people don't have an eye for that. They don't care about that. Um, and this is descriptive of the mentality of most people. This is just the context of gaming, yeah, but
yeah,
this would apply to just about everything. One reason I can't go to the cinema anymore, apart from me being poor and just a rip off the amount of money it costs, it's
mm.
always the same tired hackney themes, some pseudo love
Yeah,
story or the hero this and the recurrence of these themes is nauseating to me because they just don't interest me. And most people still get off on it, on some level. Uh,
yeah,
uh, it's it's why they're successful because people continue to watch it. So we're stuck. Most of us are stuck on autopilot. And unfortunately, the sad thing is people much smarter than I am are still stuck on autopilot.
yeah,
It's this is autopilot does imply some level of stupidity, but there are plenty of really smart people who are stuck on autopilot. In some cases, I'm not entirely sure. If I think about guys like Dawkins or Pinker, how much of it is just pandering because, well,
mm.
they lose
I,
their
I,
jobs effectively, or they lose.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think in the case of Dawkins in particular, it's probably pandering because I mean, we saw what happened when he did, speak out.
Yeah,
his whole little community turned on him like a pack of wolves.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, Dawkins, I think, I mean, he's got to protect his interests, but I mean, I
Yeah,
think he's a guy who's genuinely interested in the objective truth above all. That's my impression.
yeah,
I think Pinker is too, although this statement he made, the sentence he wrote, women have, you know, shaken off a thousand millennia of oppression. I mean, it was kind of,
yeah,
was he doing that to
yeah.
appeal? I don't know, appease? I don't really know.
I,
Um,
yeah, it's hard to say.
and we've
I
talked
mean, I
about
don't
this.
think he'd never probably clarified in public. Like you could maybe if you ever had a private, the chance of having a private conversation with him, you could ask him. But I don't think that's something. I mean, even if he was just pandering, I I don't think he'd admit to that.
Well, no, obviously not. But we talked about this. I mean, this is why even objective criteria within academia don't work because ego is involved, fear is involved, political interests are involved. So it's one
Mm,
giant mess, and we're probably not going to be able to fix it. We have some pretty dismal prospects for humanity. I
mm,
see, like I said, the only solution I see, and I don't think it's a viable one, is really transforming what it means to be human, starting with ideas, which was the point of
yeah,
escape velocity, moving to a more idea-oriented mindset, and working
yeah,
towards literally uplifting ourselves from our savage origins, because
yeah,
uh, proceeding ahead as we are, we're not doing a good job of that. And uh, fighting, supposedly fighting for men's rights. This is just so you can get back to status quo. well, we're not going back to status quo for the reasons of mechanization effect, the technology
Yeah.
that came, birth control, mobility, things like that. But I think over time my interests moved from simply being involved in men's issues and affairs, and I'm still interested in that, to a bigger
Yeah.
picture. And I think
Yeah.
that's a natural evolution, and it kind of has to take place because we as men, to the extent that we countenance female mediocrity and say it's okay because they got firm D cups and a nice ass, that's not good enough. And I don't see people shifting away from that mentality. I don't see men doing that, and I
Mm.
don't see women, women even less so. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I
women
guess the
driven
question.
by ideas.
Yeah.
They're driven by bad
Well,
ideas. Oh, sorry, they're driven by bad ideas. But
yeah. Well, I guess the question is though. I mean, I'd say like Google Glasses, for example, would be a step in that direction. But I mean, if people aren't going to utilize it for a positive purpose, I mean, when you get further down the track and you're talking about, changing the very nature of the human condition, like what augmentations would people actually accept?
well, okay, now we're moving towards the end, but this is an interesting topic, right? So, if we don't shift to an idea-driven economy, the augmentations people would accept would be ones that would still be backed up by evolutionarily grounded
Yeah.
reasons, or at least motivations, rather, evolutionary-based motivations.
Mm.
So, for displays of athleticism in men,
Yeah.
you'd have augmentation. They already, I mean, that's what steroids do. I mean, it's the same thing
Yeah.
basically. They
And I
do
mean,
that.
I guess the inverse is also true. Breast implants
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Breast implants, lip puffing, whatever. I don't know these surgical procedures. So, making your lips bigger for women,
yeah.
cheekbone carving, nose jobs. The list is endless. Butt
Mm.
enhancement, whatever. It's all
Yeah.
there already. So, presumably, unfortunately, augmentations would go probably towards those goals and purposes rather than cerebral enhancement. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, well, you could. I mean, for example, in Deus Ex, they have a pheromone kind of augmentation which allows you to kind of use pheromones to manipulate behaviors. So but even
Mm.
that could be used to, for by PUAs to get sex easily or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see, I don't see human beings in general working towards using that technology to uh, bre- make scientific breakthroughs or just pushing the limits and boundaries of knowledge. I mean, we just have to think about how many chosen ones are there out there? Very few. I mean, there's a reason why,
Yeah.
just statistically highly improbable. If
Yeah.
if if 25% of humanity became chosen ones overnight, well, maybe we could literally talk a different game here. But uh,
Yeah.
uh, you know, what is Morgan
But not
Freeman? Sorry, go on.
not even 25% of us being chosen ones. I mean, if you just had a a, a condition where 25% of average people just decided to start reading and learning and expanding their
Oh yeah.
knowledge base more. Like it doesn't even have to be
If my
a
ex-wife, for
huge,
example, decided one day that she would like to peruse a bookstore, that would be an
yeah, like
accomplishment.
it doesn't have to be an army of apex minds, even if average people just kind of somehow became more interested in how things work.
Well, but the apex mind is nonetheless an inspiration because they have this sort of
Yeah,
natural drive to understand things
yeah,
because they understand things so well because of their gifts.
yeah,
Um, but part of the problem is apex minds tend to have to put in less effort to
mm,
understand complex things, whereas an average mind might not even understand the mathematical concepts, say the chosen one understands almost intuitively at all. Even if he
mm,
could, he might need, weeks or months to get a couple of basic concepts. Um,
yeah,
so that's an obstacle. I think it's an
yeah,
effort thing, and for average minds and even smart minds, I fully
yeah,
admit some of the maths that the apex minds are doing, I would take a long time for me to grasp them fully, and I would forget
yeah.
them quickly. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, I mean, these that kind of like wearable computing, which would augment a person's knowledge base, wouldn't necessarily make somebody smarter in the IQ sense. But I mean, yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to understand that level of mathematics to look up on Wikipedia how a like how a rainbow kind of
Once again, Colttaine, I'll say that we don't have the wiki the Google Glasses yet, but anyone with a smartphone or an iPhone or a working mobile these days, although I don't have internet on my mobile, has access to,
yeah,
can attend the University of Wikipedia effectively. I mean,
yeah,
how many people
yeah,
actually do that? They don't do that usually. I've never seen
yeah,
anyone in public do that. I observe, I'm a keen
mm,
observer. People don't do that. They just
yeah,
rant or look up where a restaurant's located or whatever. So
yeah,
you'd have to produce an argument to suggest that moving, say, from mobile apps to wearing glasses would somehow change people's desire to attend the University of Wikipedia.
yeah. Well, I guess that I mean that like that goes for the entire gradient of future technological advances, though. Like I was saying, like what augmentations would people would the average person accept? Like,
Sadly, I believe they would just further be fueled by evolutionary backed motivations and
yeah,
not trying to move past that. I mean, if we let's say we could I mean, if we could actually do that, I think we can. I mean, people misunderstand when we talk about determinism. Certainly, you as a hobby mathematician, we're talking about probabilities.
yeah,
Um, so things are just probabilistic. That
mhm,
means that if there's a certain number of people, if there's a certain number of people, such as you or I, and
mm,
we can come up and maybe agree on an idea-driven economy or civilizational engine. That means that there within the deterministic framework, there's some variable that can lead to that, which means that potentially other people could think that way too. So it's actually
yeah,
not an impossibility so much as it's just very improbable, I think.
yeah. I guess the thing that I'm sort of thinking about here is that it's obviously a problem that is independent of I it's kind of almost like a catch 22. The problem is almost independent of any technology we could come up with to try and solve it.
Um, yeah. Well, new technology just tends to converge onto whatever pre-programming we've had or whatever our autopilot function is, right? I mean,
Yeah,
maybe I don't know. This is me just talking out my ass. Maybe at some point in time, owning a stallion was a status symbol in some civilization, and it turned women on. So now you have a Corvette or a Porsche or whatever.
yeah,
So the new technology just gets adapted to the same old patterns that we've always been exhibiting.
yeah,
I mean, you see this. The male drive to excel is based on dominance hierarchy reasons. Desire to compete, displays of
yeah,
God, God's in heaven. I'm knackered. Athleticism are
yeah,
um, are ultimately displays of your ability to compete against other males, and whether people on an ultimate cause level. I'm not talking necessarily approximately, but and
yeah.
people use whatever they'll use to enhance themselves, steroids. And people are ready. Do you know what myostatin, the myostatin gene is? It's the gene that's
Uh,
responsible for limiting muscle growth, for example. So they've been trying to work on ways of blocking that out. And I mean,
okay.
so mechanical augmentation would probabilistically speaking, given our current track record, just be adapted to further our autopilot functions and primitive instincts rather than to, as you might envision, yeah, let's learn about the light spectrum via University of Wikipedia on using Google Glasses, or
Yeah,
there's a world of knowledge out there. Let's start building, inventing. Let's start tossing ideas out there. Um, oh, I mean, let's be honest. It's probably not going to happen. Not. It's going to be technology will. I mean, in a way, you know Mass Effect, right? So Sovereign
yeah,
tells Shepard that the the Mass Effect relay technology and everything has been developed along the lines that, well, why is it there? Why do the Reapers leave the technology there? So future civilizations develop along the lines the Reapers choose. Now, in our
Yeah.
case, it's highly unlikely we have the Reapers involved, but we
Mm.
have our Reaper is our evolutionary past.
Yeah.
It's our legacy, our evolutionary legacy. And the technology we're using is just going to be adapted to that legacy. What I think
Yeah.
is necessary, and I say this as a full out transhumanist, is separating ourselves from that legacy. And I think it can be done. I just think it's bloody difficult to do.
Yeah.
That it's it's what we talk about probabilities and we talk about the lack of autonomous mind for you and me.
Yeah.
That is a probability that is extant, that we could pursue, that it's there, but many other people will not be within that field of probability, if you will. I mean, there's gonna most people are just gonna continue along the lines the Reapers wish them to, as it were. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this
You know,
is
I
the grand
suppose.
obstacle.
Yeah. Well, I suppose this even comes back to the very beginning of our discussion when sort of talking about the difference between MGTOW and PUA, where they essentially talk about a lot of the same things, but the PUAs are still ultimately driven. They're still ultimately driven by the Reaper,
Yeah, absolutely. I think the
e- e- even though they have all the same information that we do, I guess.
right. So I mean, I think we could speed up technological advancement, but ultimately the question is, what are we going to do with the technology? Are we going to use it for Reaper-driven purposes, or are we going to break free from the cycle? I think it's a
Yeah.
great analogy. I mean, the idea, as poorly told as the story is in some parts, that
Mm.
eventually the races could break free from the cycle. I guess that's essentially what I've been arguing and what I argued in escape velocity is,
Yeah.
escape velocity I used in that metaphorical sense of really just trying to get to the stars eventually.
Mm.
But most, I guess, not to further the analogy, most people are indoctrinated. So,
Yeah.
and it's almost impossible to break free from indoctrination. So what the solution is, I don't know. But we've talked about this. I would like to see MGTOW grow as an intellectual community that talks
Yeah.
about ideas, if only just to not necessarily implementing them, to get the ideas out on the table. And
Yeah.
but how that would come about, I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, men go their own way for different reasons.
Yeah.
And I don't see, as you said, the grass eater community, I don't see that really happening. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where I think. I mean, a lot of the new channels that have been springing up are very much repetition of what's already been said. I think we need to really start looking
right.
towards
Which is why I
new,
recommend your
new
channel,
ideas.
because
And
your channel actually is insightful and offers some new thoughts on things.
thanks. But yeah, focus on like, hey, we know marriage is bad. Like, where do we go from there? Like, we need to stop repeating ourselves and actually start
Absolutely. I've been
like
saying this for over a year now.
yeah, further building upon ideas that are already out there.
Exactly. We need to continue the propagation of ideas. We have all the basics, and we need to move with that. Having said that, we are effectively at the end because my day is dwindling away, and you are already engulfed in darkness with whitetail
Yep.
spiders, funnel webs, and taipans surrounding you, possibly seeking your blood. So,
I'll survive them. I've made it through thus far.
so I will now stop the recording. But
Yep.
everyone who appreciated this conversation with this very interesting and intelligent fellow, Colttaine from the Penal Colony. I will be posting a link to his channel, and I think I see him certainly as one of the forerunners of MGTOW thought. He's a very creative, analytical, and thoughtful guy, and of all the newly sprung up channels, his is by far the best. So check out that link, check out his videos. And of course, I'll be making videos on at some point in time on some of the topics that were touched on in greater depth. Until then, as always, may the gods watch over you. And now you know which gods. Everyone, take care.